Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am recording a super exciting talk today with Daniel Sowelu, who is an astrologer who lives in Australia. And we're going to get into many facets of what Daniel does, but the main topic that we're talking about today, which is, again, so exciting for me, is from Venus and Mars to Shiva and Shakti, evolutionary pathways towards the sacred marriage. And I asked Daniel to speak on this topic because, well, obviously it's a huge part of the work he does, but it felt like such a beautiful addition to the last week of this Rebecoming the One symposium, where we're exploring how do we bring together the feminine and the masculine and the non-binary and the whole spectrum of gender and sexuality, all of it into one. How do we do that? We all want that. And then what are some avenues for doing that? And so in this week, we have a number of talks that are addressing the various avenues of how, and we have a talk on Tantra itself with Maitre Miliana, super beautiful conversation I had with her. We have a beautiful talk with Maura McBratney, also about the sacred inner union within. And, several other talks. For example, another talk that is pretty beautifully parallel to this one that I think we're about to have here with Daniel is the conversation I had with Kelly Hunter, who's also a really, 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 really well-known, amazing astrologer. And her talk is on cosmic couples. If you haven't watched that one yet, definitely watch it. If you're interested in astrology and you're interested in this topic of, bringing together the masculine and the feminine, that conversation with Kelly Hunter is off the chart. So with Kelly Hunter, we talked about cosmic couples and her take on sort of going through various aspects of the astrological archetypal pairing of the masculine and feminine. And she starts also with Mars and Venus and goes up through Cheroklo and Chiron, and then a few different pairings up to Manwë and Varda, which in her conversation, I would say Manwë and Varda are the two that I resonated with the most. So anyway, go watch that to see that whole conversation. But what Daniel is bringing, which is really new and different and so enlivening and exciting for me, is that Daniel works with asteroids and planetary bodies in the sky that I didn't even know exist, that are more related to the Hindu gods and goddesses, such as Kali, Lalita, Parvati, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're going to be talking about today is Daniel's perception of an evolutionary way we can look at these archetypes, but then also in ourselves and in the world, but then also in the astrological chart. So I have a feeling this conversation is going to be absolutely perfect for you if you happen to be into astrology, but also beautiful for all of us, any of us, whether or not we are understand the astrological language or not. So anyway, Daniel, thank you so much for being here, and I'm really excited to learn and listen.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And like you're the perfect client, Martha.
Why?
Well, because you get it straight away. It's like, like the sense of this kind of opening us up to new vistas, whether to see our relationship evolution in general, and in the astrology charts, there are these other pathways that you can pursue. So, this is precisely why I love sharing this stuff. And before we get into questions, though, what I really want to emphasize is that a lot of this comes from my, 35 years plus work with the experiential astrology. A lot of what I share is lived experience, whether within myself or with working with clients, with this very embodied, powerful and transformative form of experiential astrology. And so I get a hint from the mythology of each archetype, but then I'll create a workshop and then we'll get people to go in and visit these parts in their chart. And out of that comes a tremendous amount of information, a lot of which you would never read in an astrological text. So there's that. But also, like, I was initiated into a Shiva Shakti tradition when I was 20. And that has informed my spiritual life ever since. And as you know, I'm also a psychotherapist. And so I've weaved this, kind of three-way interaction, really. And the center point, which is the experiential practice. Beautiful. Because it opens up the three dimensions of our inner life. Yeah, so, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, and I want to ask you many questions related to what you just said. Before we get into that, though, I'm going to read your bio just so people have the basic gist of who you are. So Daniel Sowelu is a therapeutic and experiential astrologer, primal therapist, teacher and trainer, and sacred tour leader in his 40th year of practice. He is the director of the Australian Institute of Primal Astrology, a vehicle for his 20 years of running professional trainings in experiential and therapeutic astrology. His spiritual and professional life has been deeply informed by lifelong practices in the Shiva Shakti Kundalini traditions of India, where he leads yearly goddess and sacred marriage tours. Beautiful. And there's so many things I could ask you about every single word in that. But since you're starting with the experiential astrology kind of underpinnings of your work with the Shiva Shakti astrology, why don't we start there? Because I had never heard of experiential astrology before I met with you a couple of weeks ago, and so I'm guessing most people listening to this have never heard of it either. So can we just start there with? Can you explain what experiential astrology is?
Experiential astrology is a broad description for any practice that allows you to access the energies of an astrological archetype. And that can be very, very subtle things like, visualization work. It can be the use of voice dialogue, which is a Jungian technique where you dialogue with an archetype within the individual system. There's a form of astrological psychodrama where you play out different roles, whether within yourself or in a group context. And so each of which kind of gives you a more visceral, embodied, emotional and energetic experience of the part of self that's represented, whether a planet, an asteroid, even the nodes can be worked with. Anything in the chart can be worked with using these techniques. And the primal astrology, the primal therapeutic astrology, which I've been developing, actually goes even deeper. And then you can actually work with supporting people to release distortions, particularly around the goddesses, for instance, where the practices that are spontaneously healing. And the key vehicle for that is a form of astrological medicine wheel. So you have images for the 12 signs, you have cards with the glyphs for the planets and asteroids and whatever you're working with, whoever you're working with. And you lay that chart out on the floor and say, if we're working with Venus and Mars, if someone's come in with relationship issues they want to work with, well, you take them into their chart physically. you lay out the symbol for Venus and Mars in the chart, and then you get them to drop into the alphabet, and then you sequentially walk them out to get physically closer to this part of self. Now, this is a really ancient tradition. In fact, I believe it's a mystery tradition, a secret tradition, even within astrology, because it is a form of ritual and ceremonial magic. But what happens when the person starts to get closer? The energy of that particular archetype arises in their body in some form. Mm. And that can be in terms of thoughts, feelings, body sensations. And if people are really ready and open for that, it can open the door for distortions to that part of self to arise, to be released, whether through breath or sound. And as a way of clearing gunk, psychic emotional gunk, that is sabotaging the way that that part of self is working in your life. And so by the time a person gets out there, chances are they've been able to release some form of internal blockage. And then more of the authentic energy of that part of self starts to show up in their bodies, in their feeling selves. It sounds, I always think, it always sounds very weird when I describe it.
No, not at all.
But if you can imagine, not just in an individual person's chart, which is powerful enough, but in the groups I run, we might have 30 people in a big wheel, and everyone is working simultaneously on one particular part of self. So you can imagine the energy field that creates for healing and connection. Yeah. So it's that wheel work, astrological wheel work, that is the core technique. And in that wheel, you can bring in spiritual practices, visualizations, regression work. You can also bring in appropriate therapeutic practices, if they need to psychodrama or do a drama in between their Venus and Mars to work out what's going on in the relationship. Or if the person is dropping into deeper layers of emotional self, then you support them to release using primal techniques. Basically, any spiritual or therapeutic technique is empowered by the intense and beautiful spiritual magic of the circle. It's extraordinary work. And you can see, I'm really keen to train people in this, which I've been doing for 20 years.
Yeah. And there are several of us involved in this symposium who, I worked as a psychotherapist for bazillion years and I'm an astrologer, and you're a therapist and an astrologer. And Chris Skidmore, also Australian. He lives in Bali though. Amazing astrologer and psychotherapist. He's a good friend of Melanie Reinhart. Heather Ensworth also is a psychologist, therapist, and astrologer. She's another speaker. There are a lot of us here. Matthew Engel also is a speaker who's he's a clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and an astrologer. And anyway, just interesting. There's so many of us here with this combination of skills and interests, and so, but you're the first person I have actually known who combines the experiential version of it and that psychodrama. And as a psychotherapist, I did a ton of work with various versions of externalization techniques, right? Like narrative therapy or art therapy or psychodrama or whatever it is, some version of being able to externalize the narrative of it. So yes, I resonate very much with what you're saying, but you're bringing together two worlds that I haven't personally ever brought together, and I'm just loving it. It's like instantaneous. Yes, of course, that makes so much sense. Yeah,
And
so we all doing that. Sorry, go ahead.
And for us as astrologers, see that one of the dangers of traditional astrology is that it can be incredibly heady and analytical, whereas this actually takes us into our bodies, into our selves.
Yes.
Sally Kempton, who's a great spiritual feminist and a goddess inspirer, said something great. She said, knowledge is rumor.
Yes.
You know it in your bones.
Oh, wait, say
So
that one more time.
knowledge is rumor until you know it in your bones.
Yes.
And I say that to people who are practicing traditionally. If you know that archetype deeply in your system, the energy that happens when you're reading a person's chart is so much deeper and will have its own healing impact, because we're not talking heads there.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
that is. Yes.
The experiential astrology, even if you don't want to use it as a therapeutic practice, is an extraordinary teaching tool.
Yes.
It really opens up and transcends limited interpretations of things.
Yes.
Yeah. So I encourage people to at least explore it, Get someone to take you into your own chart so you've got more of that experiential stored in your system.
Absolutely. Yeah. And my training in astrology is primarily in evolutionary astrology, which can be pretty heady in a certain sense. I mean, certainly the person who I happen to mostly study with, Ari Moshe Wolf, is beautiful, wonderful, amazing human, really close friend of mine. And he's highly, highly intellectualized, very Sagittarian type person, very into the philosophy kind of it. And what I would do actually with his course is that after I was done with it, then the next year I led a course, or not, sorry, I led circles for his students of coming into the felt sense of what he was teaching the mind version, and I felt really called to teach the body version of it. So, and then after I felt done with that, then I spent the last year studying with Heather Ensworth, who the way she teaches, she incorporates evolutionary astrology with some shamanic astrology, and she led us into journeys to the planets themselves, right? So that was a version of an more experiential way of learning. But what you're talking about is an element that I can feel in my own body and my own self, is like, okay, here's a third component that, Martha, you need to, yes, this is also how you're meant to be grounding and coming into this way of being with the astrology that I can feel was missing for me. I could feel it needed to click in here. And so, yeah, so I think, anyway, that's a whole other conversation, but I can just feel it as you're talking that, and as we were talking a couple of weeks ago, that yes, I am absolutely called to hold space in the world for an embodied and experiential way of being with the cosmos, being with ourselves. And something that bothers me, and I've spoken with Heather Ensworth, we did an interview together about a month ago, and I was talking in there about how it just doesn't feel good in myself to do a version of astrology that is really predictive and from the mind, and feels very concrete and kind of fatalistic in a sense. And what you're describing is, so in line with what my value set is that our relationship to the cosmos and our relationship to ourselves needs to be coming from deep inside ourselves, as opposed to anybody else telling us, oh, your Jupiter will conjunct your Venus and therefore you will XYZ. that doesn't feel good for me to be on the receiving end of, and it really does not feel good to be on the giving end of it. It doesn't, I don't do that. I don't like it. And I don't feel like it serves anyone typically. So yes, I'm just saying thank you. You're deepening in me something that I was ready for that puzzle piece, and I can feel it clicking. So thanks. Yeah, many more, I think, more roads to go down with that. Just probably for the next years or something. So does that feel complete in terms of explaining experiential astrology?
Thank you for the opportunity to.
Great. So then let's bring in your approach to this Shiva Shakti astrology, the Shiva Shakti astrology.
Yes.
How does, let's take the path into that next, and take us down that journey.
Well, it's not a new concept in the sense that, a lot of people are aware that, Venus and Mars isn't the be all and end all of our relationship life. It's actually the starting point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And while, Venus and Mars working really well in a relationship means, you've got a really good starter in the relationship. But obviously our relationships have to evolve and grow as we do. Yeah. And in Western astrology, like the pathways of relationship evolution, starting from Venus and Mars, on one level, they head towards Eros and Psyche, who are higher octaves of both. And so you're starting to then get into more heightened expressions of relationship interactions. Psyche is a goddess that represents our profound longing, the soul-to-soul union beyond just, a physical, emotional connection. And even though Eros can be rather flighty, he's a goddess of sensuality, a god of sensuality and sexuality who has wings. There's a suggestion that we're rising above that original template. Now, they have their own journey, and it's really worthwhile checking out the myth because it says a lot, particularly in the early years of our lives, our adult lives. But eventually then you start thinking of heading towards Jupiter and Juno, king and queen archetypes. They themselves are a form of the sacred marriage. And to get there is a great place because there's a lot of grace there. And if you ignore the Greco-Roman interpretations of their relationship or their overemphasis on the strife, there are two grand bodies of grace, king and queen archetype. And that's, you get there in a relationship, you're doing really, really well, obviously. Yeah. You're feeling like you're the king or the queen in your primary relationship. That's a pretty damn good place. But if you start to look towards the Shiva Shakti, which I'll talk about in a moment, it's like there's more. But while we're on the Western edge, the alternative pathways are from Juno heading towards Mary Magdalene. Because in the experiential work, we've discovered through my clients' experiences that the energies of Parvati, the Hindu goddess of the sacred marriage, are very, very similar to that of Mary Magdalene.
Wow.
Yeah. And the Magdala asteroid, which is one of the focal points to access that quality of the feminine.
I have never heard of that asteroid either. Wow.
There's another little thing to drop into your. Yeah. So, and so Mary Magdalene points towards like even higher level of mystical relationship to the sacred masculine. which is equivalent to the heading towards the Shiva Shakti.
And does the Magda asteroid, is there a masculine counterpart to that one, or?
That's always going to be a mystery. There is a Jeshua asteroid. I haven't worked with it personally, but it has possibilities. It's been a long debate in astrology. How is the Christ energy? Where is that reflected? How is it reflected astrologically?
Wow.
Yeah.
And what about
somewhere?
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. What?
It will be there somewhere, but I just haven't had time to go up that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. What about Parvati? Is there a counterpart for her?
Well, Parvati's counterpart is Mary Magdalene. Yeah. And vice versa.
Even though they're both feminine? I mean, like, is there a partner? Parvati's in mythology, Parvati's partner was Shiva. Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. This is a good point to. In the different mythologies, Shiva, who is said to be the highest expression of the sacred masculine, has a number of different wives. Now, that doesn't mean he's polygamous.
No. Right. Yes, right.
These reflect different aspects of the relationship between this core sacred masculine with different faces of the goddess.
Yes.
Like he's married to Durga, he's married to Lalita, he's married to Kali, he's married to Parvati.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is that these are the so-called Shakti goddesses, and they are tantric goddesses. And instead of seeing them as separate goddesses, they're actually different faces of the one goddess energy.
Right.
Like in India, Durga is said to be the great mother who births all the other goddesses. But in this circular arrangement, there's Kali, there's Parvati, there's Lalita.
Yeah.
Gorgeous and powerful and scary expressions of, and Shiva has relationships with each of them. But it's really like a cosmic game, different faces of the one goddess energy. Yeah. Now, but the ultimate in Hindu mythology, the ultimate sacred marriage is between Parvati and Shiva. Yeah. And her story is extraordinary. Because what happens is that, and we'll dip into a bit of the mythology, Shiva's first wife was a goddess called Sati.
Yeah.
And a great tragedy happened, and she dies.
Yeah.
And he is so distraught that he goes off into the Himalayas and disappears into meditation and stays there, for millions of years. This is God time we're talking about. Trouble is, Shiva is the transformer and the destroyer. Part of his cosmic role is to destroy things so there can be rebirths, so things can be created. So because he's not on the job, the universe is starting to get a bit constipated.
Yeah.
Energetically. So the gods think, how can we bring Shiva out of his meditation? He's so powerful spiritually, it's almost impossible. But they realize the one thing they can do is to offer him a goddess who is capable of meeting him and drawing him out. So this female young daughter is born to a mountain king, and she knows even as a little girl she's meant to marry Shiva. And she grows into this beautiful young woman And the gods try and constellate a situation where they try and draw him out of his meditation. And it partially works, but then goes south. And he disappears again. And what she does at this point is that she realizes that she's going to have to really develop herself spiritually to be powerful enough to bring him out of his detachment, bring him out of his otherworldliness, out of his meditation. So she goes and stands in an icy mountain stream and repeats his mantra.
On one leg, is that how it's, she stands on one leg, right? Yeah.
And out of those intense practices, she becomes more and more powerful. She accumulates more and more Shakti. And in the end, she is so radiant with Shakti that even though he's way in the Himalayas, he senses her. And she's able to draw him out and to bond with her. And the interesting thing about that, and this is why it's such a great myth, is by the time this happens, she's so powerful, she's his equal.
Yeah.
And she doesn't need him.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the contract, we are meant to be this embodiment.
Yeah.
And so they have this extraordinary bonding. And they become the ultimate, power couple spiritually.
Yeah.
So they are like higher octaves of Juno and Jupiter. And they are also a tantric couple. Like their sexuality, their sexual exchanges are legendary, and they are feisty. They have brilliant fights.
Mm-hmm.
And if she pisses him off, he can become this all-towering kind of, someone who could melt someone just with a thought from his third eye. If he pisses her off, she turns into Kali.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she's no pushover, she's not this kind of, oh, Shiva, you're so great, I'm so lowly. They are a power couple.
Right.
But they play out this cosmic game, like she pretends to be his disciple and he pretends to teach. Mm-hmm. But she knows how to draw the knowledge out of him. Mm. Yeah, but she already knows it.
She is it. That's my experience, is that she is it. Yes. I mean, we all are it, right? But that's how I feel her.
Yeah.
Not just that she knows it. She is. Maybe it's because Parvati is conjunct my Venus that I feel that way. Conjunct my South Node, but I feel her as. Yeah. Anyway, yes.
Sorry, the sun's doing some strange light.
Yeah, no problem.
So in many ways, spiritually, this is the goal of the sacred marriage. And this is where I love the multi-dimensions of Shiva. Because, on one hand, he's a yogi god. So he represents the highest of enlightenment. And Shiva energy actually opens us up to that pure cosmic consciousness that pervades all of existence. Yeah. So he is that. And yet, on a deep level, he's an embodied, primal god of Tantra. So he's not just this upper chakra creature. He is the full deal. And so he represents sacred masculine sexuality as its highest. And what is the source material that comes from is that goes all the way back to Venus and particularly Mars.
Mm.
Because Shiva is what happens when we purify and refine the raw power and aggression of Mars.
Mm.
We go through different stages of that, you know, to the Jupiter to Saturn stage where we have to unravel the toxic and stuck masculine, then through the Chiron, you know, like being healed in those really deep levels. They're all stepping stones towards, ideally at least, attaining this Shiva consciousness.
Mm. Mm.
And that in a way describes the evolution of the masculine spiritually and sexually. And when you even touch, however briefly, into this union between the sacred sexuality of the masculine and Shiva consciousness within yourself, it's extraordinary.
Yeah. Yes.
And transformative and purificatory and extraordinary opening psychically and spiritually.
Yes.
Yeah, and in between these two, he's a wild man. He's untamable. He hangs out with wild animals and ghosts and spirits. And it's like, yeah, he's free. He represents a level of freedom that is beyond, you know, like the alleged freedom of, say, low-level Jupiter, you know, playing out in terms of infidelity.
Yeah.
So that, you know, the Shiva offers this kind of pathway. And the pathway towards Parvati is, like the myth says, it's like, you know, to move beyond average relationships through intense spiritual, and I would add therapeutic processes. Because, and you don't hear this enough in conversations around, you know, like reclaiming the feminine, you know, whether for women and men, just as important in men. And you don't hear it enough in terms of the evolution of the masculine, but we have to deal with our shit. And we have to deal with distortions to both. Distortions to the sacred feminine, distortions to the sacred masculine.
Yes.
You know, whether that's toxic masculinity or, you know, aggressive, destructive masculinity, whether that's distorted, toxic feminine energy because of generations, lifetimes, thousands of years of suppression of the intelligence and the individualism of the feminine. So in between these, you know, we're down here, we're starting with Venus and Mars and we're working our way upwards. And up here is Shiva and Parvati, up here is Christ and Mary Magdalene. Mm. But in between there is a place that we have to deal with our shadows.
Wow.
We have to really, really work it.
And not just go straight all the way up and try to just jump. Is that what you're saying?
That's a form of spiritual bypassing.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is why, you know, if you only get there and don't do that, then your relationships will stuff up. Mm-hmm. You will sabotage them. Because whatever's being rejected and not healed will undermine the connection. And for a lot of us, you know, we need at least one decent separation in our lives to wake us up to that.
What do you mean by separation?
Well, the end of a marriage, long distance, you know, long-term relationship. It seems to be part of the journey for a lot of us. Yeah. Because those relationships have been based on those lower versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the template doesn't work for them, doesn't work for us, and so things have to deconstruct.
Yeah.
And that's reflected in the Lilith myth, for instance.
Yes.
She'd rather be in exile than stay in that unequal place. But you don't want to get stuck there either.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so both the Lilith myth and the Parvati myth, for instance, they point out that you have to do the work around your trauma, your pain, and not just your own personal stuff. It's the stuff you carry generationally.
And throughout all of existence. That's my experience too, is that it's a collective thing, yes, that I feel myself working through too. Yeah,
because even if you can head towards Parvati and Shiva, etc. But if you haven't done the work, you can't stay there.
So this is my personal experience. I'm curious to hear your take on it. So what I have incredibly powerful, I don't tend to talk about this with almost anybody, much less publicly, right? But I feel like I'm supposed to, so I will. I don't think I've ever said this. No, that's not true. I have talked about this in a couple of the other videos for this week, actually. But yeah, so I have mentioned it publicly. But so in my own praying and in myself over the last several years, I am consistently shown this, incredibly powerful cosmic coming together of the masculine and feminine in the stars, in the void, beyond the time-space continuum. It's like the powerful feminine and the powerful masculine, the pure version of them coming together consistently over and over and over again. And I'm told in my prayers that that's a huge part of my work in the world and who my being is, and that's who we all are and all of that, right? And so for sure, on a certain level, I'm called to hold that space energetically in myself and in the world, for sure.
Yeah.
And at the same time, in my own personal life, I can, just without any details at all, I can say I for sure have gone through the Venus Mars and the Psyche Eros, and I can think of a version of maybe the Jupiter Juno-ish, sort of. Not, I don't really relate to that one actually so much, but definitely the Venus Mars, and for sure the Psyche Eros. But it feels to me like that ultimate thing, that vision that I get shown in my prayers pretty much every day for the past many years, is more of the Parvati Shiva something. That's what it feels like to me. And so from my personal experience, what it feels to me like is that the cosmos, the spirit world, source, the earth, are holding space. They're basically asking me to both hold that presence and that way of knowing and being in that ultimate highest way of being with the feminine and masculine energetic, and at the same time do the work. Like the work here still for me as a human is it's moving through all of those layers all at the same time. I wouldn't, in my personal life, I don't feel like I've necessarily gone in a linear fashion from the Venus Mars to the Psyche Eros to the I feel like it's more kind of interwoven over time, and different relationships have both of some and a little bit of this. And just from my sense of what you're saying, at least, how does that fit or not fit with?
No, that fits. Well, what I'm describing here is a really nice way of like making sense of a path or different pathway. Yeah, our lived experience is that it's a mess. It's a jigsaw of all of it. And all of that all happening simultaneously. But see, part of the reason why I love this is that including like whether it's Kali, Shiva, Parvati in the chart,
Yes.
you can have conversations with your clients around that. And you can highlight for them that, you know, there is these visionary places that have potential for all of us.
Yeah.
Particularly to that part of ourselves that even as newborns kind of felt that, you know, there's the possibility of a soul to soul union in this life, but it's not like that new agey, you know, twin flame kind of stuff. Not to invalidate that, but it almost never talks about the work you got to do to get there. Yeah. And see that in these pathways of evolving the feminine and the masculine towards these goals, there's this whole layer where we hit, you know, whether we call that the Chiron layer, whether we hit that as the you know, the Pluto, Neptune transformational necessities. And we also hit the distorted expressions of the dark feminine. Yeah. And that's where there's incredibly important stages that we must go through. And to give an example, like a lot of people, you know, after that they've had an initial marriage or long-term thing, they will attract what I call black moon relationship experiences. Black moon relationship experiences are these intense attractions. And when something like that comes into your life, there's this feeling like, oh shit, I'm not going to be able to go around this one. I'm going to need to have this. And it can set up intensely sexual and spiritual attractions to an individual that has a lot of karmic edges to it. Yeah. But the black moon relationship is not goal orientated towards the survival of the relationship. Its orientation is to purify both people. But in the middle of the intense karma behind it, you'll get given flashes of this sacred marriage.
Yep. Been there, done that. Yep.
And it's like, oh, yeah. And that can intensify the attraction as well as, you know, wanting to stay there.
Yeah.
But it's like the goddess is saying, we're going to show you what's possible.
Yeah. And
we're going to rub your nose in what you've got to work with. Yeah. And that kind of the alchemy that's created, like the great mystic scholar Andrew Harvey calls it psychic chemotherapy.
Wow. Okay. What does he mean by that?
Well, that the whole combination and the karma and the purificatory processes are so, you know, they dredge up ancient forms of toxins. Yeah. That have to be released in order to be able to step closer to the Shiva Shakti vision. Yeah. And this is why, and here I just want to mention, we've been fed so much distortions about the dark feminine, you know, even calling the dark goddesses, you know, it's like our civilization has said, oh, this is the dark feminine, it's evil, it's destructive, you've got to keep it under control, you've got to not go there. But that's another form of spiritual bypassing. Because yes, the dark feminine can be insanely destructive. When the dark goddesses are in their wounded, distorted, enraged places, you think of Lilith, Kali, Medusa, then yeah, they'll destroy your life. They'll sabotage your relationships. But that's their distorted versions of their energy. And those distortions go back into our family systems, into our past life records, into 4,000 years of patriarchal culture. So we have to work that stuff to release it, because when those goddesses are re-owned, they open up to who they really are.
Yeah.
And they are of the deepest love.
Yeah.
You know, like the pure love of the Great Mother radiates through them. They are profoundly erotic in that deep tantric sense, you know, way that would melt anyone's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, they're fierce spiritual warriors.
Yep.
So they're extraordinary. They are Shakti goddesses, you know, including Medusa, including Lilith.
Yeah.
And as they purify, then instead of being obstacles in our relationships and spiritual life, they become our greatest allies. Yeah. And you can imagine, you know, like Kali comes and takes your hand and introduces you to Shiva and Parvati.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it's good to be able to talk to, you know, like, you know, I've been working with this territory for a long, long time. And I realized very early on that the clients I was attracting, both as a therapist and an astrologer, had tons of these dark goddesses, but in their heavily distorted ways. And when you really looked at it, it explained their mental illnesses, it described the suicidal tendencies in some of their ancestors, it described their potential for co-creating abusive relationships. It's like there's a whole conga line of symptoms that come from distortions to the dark feminine. And paralleling, obviously, in the masculine, you know, around heavily Saturnized, toxic, destructive, you know, black Pluto energies in the masculine. So that purificatory stage is critical. Yeah. But unlike what our civilization and even until recently psychiatry is like, you know, unlike that, you know, you just got to control this stuff. The truth is you can work it. You can heal even the most toxic of these energies if you have the right spiritual and therapeutic practices. But it needs a level of commitment for years of work. But the results are unbelievably worth it.
Yeah. And I can say my personal experience again is that I have Lilith, the asteroid, squaring my nodes. And I have I have very, very, very strong, very powerful dark feminine energies in my own chart, my own self, my own life. I would say that I've said this to you before, but it's probably the number one archetypal flavor of who I am in this, what I've come into this lifetime with. And I don't feel like I've played out those extremes that you're talking about, honestly, but and I don't think everybody does, but what I can say is that as I have become more and more conscious of those energies as me, and embodied them more and gone through the layers of karmic trauma and pain associated with them. Again, nothing extreme like what you're talking about, but it's more for me, what I carry in my own psychic memory is the deep, intense grief and suffering on this planet through eons of the feminine in general, and the power of existence that has been who I've been in many, many lifetimes, typically as like more kind of like a dark feminine healer who has been shunned in some way or like ostracized, or that's the memories that I have of my past lives typically are that kind of archetype. So there's a lot of grief that I came into this lifetime around the way that the power of the feminine has been treated or mistreated. And as I've worked with those layers of things, then what I've come into is this sense, like with the Lilith archetype, I've had some incredibly powerful experiences over the last several years of feeling like that typical Lilith narrative of needing to leave the Garden of Eden and doing doing time kind of ostracizing myself in a sense, and then realizing that that wasn't necessary, and that actually what I find over there, instead of feeling disempowered, I find that I am the power of existence, right? And suddenly I embody that I am, literally, we all are, everything. And so then at this point in my life, I think my experience of myself, at least, is that I am in a point where I'm getting it. I'm really getting it on deep levels, that dark feminine at least what I experience as an incredibly blissful, still with layers of that grief there, but and some anger that comes through, but really mostly just feeling exactly what you described. When I channel, for example, I feel the literal power and unbelievably intense love of everything. I mean, everything. The whole time-space continuum, the divine love and power of all of it comes straight through my body. And it's like that whole power just is wanting to be me, into the world. And that comes through in all different ways in my life. But that's exactly what you're describing. And it feels like it's something that needs to continuously be refined. And it's almost like a muscle that I've had to develop to be able to not just have it pour through me, but, involuntarily, it's like it's more and more and more getting integrated into who I am. And I can kind of modulate it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Hindus say something really good about that. It's like a lot of our preparation work is purifying our system, physically and subtle systems, so we can handle increasing voltages of Shakti.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and this is what happens, like, in terms of Lilith or Medusa, for instance. And see, part of the reason I created, these systems in my head is because it infuses and creates workshop possibilities. Like, okay, Medusa's really up next month. Let's create something. So I gather a bunch of people, we go into the wheel, we really work her.
Yes.
And even in the act of that, simply by stepping out to our Medusa positions, you're real, you're important to us. We want you to come home. We want to bring you in from exile. We want you to live with us.
Oh, wow.
So what a message in itself, just by, in this magic circle, stepping out to her in your chart, saying, I claim you. Please come.
I love you. I love you. I am you. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the stepping out, chances are some distortions will arise, some rage will come, some grief. So you let yourself have it, and allow that to come through, and then step out and stand with her. And often, if the works happen really well, you get a full experience of her essence.
Amazing.
Which is exquisite. and loving, and for a man so erotic, you just feel like a puddle at her feet. Yeah, so this is another reason why kind of linked up these pathways, because you can create workshops at each point, particularly with the experiential work, and then you can actively work with the archetypes involved. And it's important work. And as you said, it's like I've had the great privilege of working with Andrew Harvey, a great mystic scholar. And he's mates with everybody, Dalai Lama, Marianne Williamson, Matthew Fox, and they're all saying the same thing. If we're going to survive this thing, we have to reclaim the goddess in all her forms.
Yep.
So this is as astrologers, this is part of our dharma, if you like, is number one, to alert people to the fact that there is so much more and that you can heal like the deepest of things, and to be able to direct people into the right spiritual and therapeutic practices to do so. This is a huge part of my own work. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so it's big picture stuff, even though we're talking about our very human relationships. And it has to be said also, like I am in a Shiva Shakti relationship, and it's come, it's taken a lot to get here, and it doesn't necessarily say it's always easy. But when you have two people who are equally committed spiritually, who are taking absolute responsibility for their own shit, their own projections, and if you get on a roll, stuff comes up, even more deeper stuff comes up, but it moves. It moves more easily, it moves more quickly, and then you step into another level of internal wholeness as well as union with each other.
Beautiful.
So and so that's very different to like the Venus and Mars places that we all started with.
So would it feel helpful or not helpful? We had talked about before we started recording that I'm happy if you want to use my chart. Would it feel helpful to give that kind of an example of how you would work with a chart and how bringing these in adds to the storyline of the chart?
If you've got time,
I have time if you have time. Okay, cool. So you had
see that?
Yes. There we go.
Okay. So is there any spot in particular you'd like to?
Well, we had looked at my chart a couple of weeks ago, and the things that particularly jumped out at me about my own chart are that Parvati is conjunct my Venus, which is kind of a big deal, especially given that Venus is on my south node, and so my Venus is incredibly prominent in my chart. It rules my north node also, and my Pluto, and it is it's in Aries, which is Venus is just very, very, very prominent in my chart to begin with. So to have Parvati conjunct my Venus would be a big deal no matter what to me. But given how prominent my Venus is, that's really, really significant to me. And then interestingly, Kali is conjunct my Mars, which also jumps out at me. And then I was curious where my Shiva is. And so my Shiva happens to be at 0 Taurus, which is interesting to me, mainly just because of the current transit. So, the North Node is currently heading right to my Shiva, and we're having this conversation, and my Shiva happens to also be conjunct my Chiron. And Jupiter just went over my, so those are the things that jump out at me, but I would love people, maybe it would be helpful for people to hear, if you're looking at this chart, for example, how would you work with that? And I also see, of course, Medusa, and a very, very prominent part of my chart as well, right on my IC in that, right in the T-square of my moon and sun and Neptune, which is very fundamental part of my chart. So again, it's like these dark goddesses just show up everywhere in my chart. And yeah, but you tell me what.
Okay. Well, Venus Parvati conjunction, what a gift that is. What an absolute gift. But it's not an easy gift.
Mm-hmm.
Because and this is what she shares with Psyche.
And Psyche is conjunct my moon.
Yeah.
On my ascendant. So yes, Psyche is also very prominent for me. Yes.
Which means that you were born impregnated in you with this knowing of the possibility of extraordinary relationship in this life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great thing, but it also produces a lot of disappointment because, you know, there's not a lot of mortals who are good at modeling Shiva.
Correct. Indeed.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but Parvati shares with a lot of the other goddesses, you know, including the dark goddesses. It's not as though they're anti-relationship. They want the fucking best for you. And they will drag you through, you know, some shittier experiences in order to be able to, you know, wake up, to be able to release, to be able to actively work towards something greater. Yeah. But it sets a super high bar.
Yes. Yeah. The highest of the highest of the high. Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of women at this point ask me, well, where can you find them?
Yeah.
Great question. Yeah.
Great question.
You know, to misquote the movie, you know, if you build it, he will come. Yeah, like if you prepare the ground, which includes, you know, like helping release the enraged and wounded distortions to the deep feminine. And even in the Lilith myth, you know, after her second or third metamorphosis or transformation, like she radiates a force field, but there's always a door that's ready for someone to really meet her.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what she really wants. That's what she's there for. That's my in me. That's what she's there for.
Yeah. Now, Mars, Kali, yeah, like there's a lot of rage in there. Yeah. The Aquarian part of self will tend to want to, you know, move away from that or to understand it, but to, at least initially in your life, to not want to really drop into the primal layers of that because it's scary stuff. Yeah. It suggests also that you've been, you know, exposed to possibly men who have a lot of unresolved rage within themselves, and that's been really, really scary for you to be around.
Yeah.
But if you're working with Kali, if you're working with Mars, and they both love the same practices like primal work, breath work, ecstatic dance, active meditations, you know, where you're actively working the energy, they both love the same stuff. And particularly where you're given support to feel safe enough that you can let whatever absorbed toxicity and rage you've taken on can be released. And then instead of it being a potential sabotage place in your life, you've got this male and profound female spiritual warrior energy meeting. Yeah.
And ruling my South Node and the Venus and the Parvati.
Yeah. With those two on your South Node, it's kind of saying you have had lifetimes where you've tasted the sacred marriage. And that's an imprint that's very much in you. But with the Mars Kali, it's suggestive, and the Chiron, there's some wounding in your past life records that still has to be attended to in this life. Yeah. But ultimately, as you know, anything on the South Node wants to be purified and refined so you can bring her gifts into this life and have even better relationships, a la your North Node.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Now, Medusa. Yeah, squaring your sun, squaring your moon on your IC. Medusa on the IC, which you and I share, it says that the Medusa archetype is strong generationally, both her positive and her distorted expressions. Yeah. So there's a lot of grief, trauma, rage in there. With the Neptune, like as a hypersensitive little girl, and in myself as well, as little ones, because we were so psychically open, we saw and felt that distorted dark feminine energy. And that's a terrifying place, particularly if it's unconscious in the family system and no one else is seeing it, no one else is helping us understand or deal with it. When an ultra-sensitive Neptunian child is exposed to that, we will tend towards wanting to anesthetize the energy that we fear. So we lock out our awareness because we've been frightened by this seemingly dark, toxic wish that hovers. You know, this is where kids have, night terrors, bad dreams, anxiety coming from seemingly nowhere. So it's a scary place, not because of the essence of Medusa, but because of the trauma that is in there from our ancestors. However, as we work the territory, then we start to connect with the lines of spiritual warrioresses, the lines of medicine women / sorceresses, those fearless aspects of the feminine that empower our Neptunian spiritual life. Yeah? And then if you can imagine like Medusa and Neptune working well, what that would look like with all your chakras. Yeah.
I'm thinking when you're speaking about that, I'm thinking about how in my own ancestral lineage, there's a lot of conversation about my great-grandfather immigrated from the Western Isles of Scotland, and supposedly the women in my family had quote unquote second sight, my family in Scotland. So would that fit with what you're describing?
Yeah, similar. There are medicine women, there are sorceresses there are mystical, powerful women there, but how much they are allowed out. In my own system, and my mother never told me this, but she was part Aboriginal. And that was part of, the ancestry. And because that part had buried, my mum was a lovely woman, but when she lost it, she actually was quite ballistic.
Wow.
Yeah, because her aboriginality had been denied with all that latent spiritual power, with all that latent relationship to the Shakti of the earth.
And
yeah.
Similarly, my family was, Gaelic speaking, and that, as you probably know, many parts of Scotland, the Gaelic and the whole way of being with the land was pretty actively suppressed as well, and colonized and all of that. And yeah.
So it's a truly great moment in our lives when Medusa opens and starts to show us her love, her gifts, her potency. Yeah. In some ways, Medusa can be seen as a European form of Kali.
Wow.
Yeah, and in fact, there is a version of Kali called Renukal, who actually loses her head in circumstances. Yeah.
And many of the wrathful goddesses in Hinduism and Buddhism have their heads cut off and blood spurting from their necks.
Yeah. And if we stretch that even further, then Lilith can be seen as a Middle Eastern version of Kali. Yeah, because they all share the same territory. Like if they've been rejected or suppressed, it brings out or dishonored, it brings out the worst in them. But they are great Shaktis and great loving Shaktis underneath. Yeah. Yeah.
One last question I'm just noticing for the first time ever, actually, in my chart. I don't know why I've never noticed this before, but my Jupiter is actually opposite my Juno. I mean, I've noticed many times that my Jupiter is conjunct my Black Moon Lilith, but I don't know why I never paid attention to the fact that it's also opposite my Juno. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about Jupiter and Juno in that interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Well, you have to start thinking about, okay, there's some form of conflict there. Yeah. And it's not a mild level of conflict, because the Black Moon just says, whoa, there's some big shadow energies here. Yeah. Juno is also a place where we can identify what can be called marriage conditioning. Yeah, like part of the template we absorbed as we observed our parents' marriage, not just what's on the surface, but what's happening underneath. So you have to think, well, was there some form of inner conflict there, or some partially concealed power struggle going on between your parents?
Yes, big time. That's what I was just actually, before you even mentioned parents, I was thinking, that dynamic of the Juno Jupiter dynamic definitely played out between my parents, not so much in my own personal relationships. So that, anyway, then you're saying parents. Yes. So yes, absolutely. Interesting.
Yeah, well, if you think, there's a T-square with Kali and Mars, it's like, whoa, there's a lot of power in there, some of which will obviously be unconscious, some of which will be locked up. Yeah, in the too hard basket, at least from our parents' generation.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But as we know, oppositions are also complements.
Right.
Yeah. And similar with the black moon, like as the dark face of the Great Mother, if the archetype within yourself has been cleared, and then she adds enormous power to your Jupiter, she adds enormous power to your Juno.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that can only be good in terms of relationships, spiritual life. And in those third and ninth houses, look at what you're doing here.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty fascinating. Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. And then just to throw in astro babble, but my progressed moon happens to currently be at 24 Taurus, right on, sitting straight on my natal Jupiter and that black moon Lilith. Yeah. So here I am holding the symposium.
Yeah. And thou shalt get to know your black moon more fully.
Yeah, I sure am. Indeed. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Martha. Really enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity of sharing it.
Yeah. Do you want to come out of the screen share for a minute and we can
stop share?
Awesome. So what I am imagining people wondering is various things. So number one, on a simple level, what are the best ways for people to look up these asteroids, the Shiva, the Shakti, all these ones you just talked about who are not typically in, for example, Astro Gold, etc. You did that on astro.com.
Yeah, astro.com is the best. It's easy. They all have numbers. You go down the bottom of the extended chart selection and you click on and it gives, the thousands of asteroids accessibility to you. Yeah.
So that's the way you typically do it, is just astro.com.
Yeah. And I say to people, there are so many asteroids, don't worry. The ones who want to work through you will come to you.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely. I fully 100% agree. And yes. So then question number two, if somebody wants a reading, because that was amazing for me, not that was a reading, but I mean, it was a taster of something. You are offering readings right now and a pretty big discount for a little while, sounds like. Do you want to say a little
more? Yeah, 10% discount till the end of July for a reading, 2-hour session.
A 2-hour session of a Shiva Shakti. And what's the price with the 10% discount? What's the actual price?
It's 400 Australian dollars.
Okay, got it. Yeah. And so that translates into US dollars somewhere probably in the 300 and something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. And then what else do you want to share about the work you do in the world, what you want to invite people into?
Well, the absolute pinnacle of our work, and I say mine and my partner's work, is we do Shiva Shakti tours of India, like 14 days on the ground. We do astrological wheel work to get in contact with these different energies within ourselves. And then we go out to her temples, his temples. So we do a lot of inner work, and then we go out and have these great outer adventures. And it's in a part of India I've been going to since I was 20s, so I know it really well. And it's rural India, so it's a really gentle way of, if you're new to India, it's a great place to start from. So yeah, so that's in October, starting October, or we're landing the 19th, starting on the 20th, goes for 14, 15 days. So that's on the cards. There's still places left.
That'll be in the middle of the eclipse season.
There's an eclipse in the middle of that, which I Yeah, so that's exciting. And next year, starting February, I'm doing an asteroid masterclass, which is 20 weeks. Each week we work symbolically and do a little experiential work on each of the asteroids over those 20 weeks. And my next year one of the experiential training, which is all on Zoom, is also starting in the same time. That's a year-long commitment in this magical, therapeutic, experiential form of astrology, which can completely change your relationship to astrology.
And that's starting February 2024.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So it's all on my website, danielsowelu.com.
Wonderful. And then you and I are talking about offering together, or anyway, to the two of us together, but mainly you, offering a deeper dive into this Shiva Shakti astrology, maybe in early October of 2023. So in a few months from now. So if anybody's interested in that, please get in contact with me, and we will get you on a list to know about that when that's happening. But I think that'll be really, really fun too.
Yeah, I can say.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. Yeah, because as we've talked about, I do a goddess series with a friend of mine, Verena Burrell, where we dive into one goddess per month, and do the astrology and the mythology, etc. But like I said, I had never even heard of the Kali asteroid or the Parvati asteroid or and my world is opened up now. So wow. So beautiful. Is there anything else you feel called to say or share, or?
No, I think we've done a fairly good job of it. And yeah, like just like what's happening here, just to open people up, like there's more. And it's not high in the sky stuff. This is the beauty about the Shiva Shakti traditions. It's like it's real, it's embodied, it's lower chakra and upper chakra.
Yes.
And I've created a whole process for purifying distortions, particularly to the dark feminine, which I can share at another time. Yeah. So yes. And for the sake of all of us, for our relationships, for our hearts, but also our contribution to the planet, you must reclaim the goddess, whatever gender you are, or anywhere in between. Yeah.
Well, and what about, the thing that's coming to my mind is like, say this, or go to there. Just says incomplete. One tiny thing incomplete is the Shiva. It's like, yes, reclaim the goddess, but what about reclaim the Shiva too? Yeah. And I'm just curious, when you're working with a chart, we didn't really talk about my Shiva, but is there something you feel called to say, but there's something that feels like it maybe needs to be said about that?
Yeah. Like, yes, there is a whole parallel process with the masculine. But the one of the pivotal points is deconstructing the old versions of Saturn in our system. Being able to step towards Chiron, and Chiron as a doorkeeper towards Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, who in turn lead to Shiva. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So yeah, we could easily spend another 2 hours talking about that.
Absolutely. Yes. And if people are interested in that, is there a way that is there somewhere you go into that? Or
I've created these 6-session processes, both for reclaiming the Shakti goddesses, but also for deconstructing the old masculine and stepping towards Shiva consciousness. There are 6-session processes on the website as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll see how spirit wants to move in that workshop in early October that we will do, but maybe there's some mini version of some of both of it that want to come through. I don't know.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's what I meant to say earlier on. It's not enough just to claim the feminine.
Mm, mm.
We have to deconstruct the masculine within ourselves as a parallel process. Yeah. Otherwise, we'll just stay imbalanced.
Mm, mm.
And just create another imbalance. So it's about working both.
Yes.
And within yourself, whatever your gender. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it as you're talking. I'm feeling it in my own being, my own body. Yeah. Got it. I love it.
Little tweak.
Yeah, that was really important to add that. It's like Shiva needs to be spoken to. Yes, because I love Shiva. I do. So yes, beautiful. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.
See you more again soon.
Yes, look forward to it.